This is advice from my friend, my coworker, Michael Cote. Don't try.
That's right.
He's got that silky smooth radio voice.
As always,
Don't try.
As always, when my boss is in the room, I like to tell him how I think about work. So I'll give you this talk. So I wanted to expound a little bit on a point that I think was made in the first presentation, which is sometimes your help is not welcome. Now let's make an abstract version of that and be like, sometimes the universe doesn't want you to help. And I would argue that's often the case. And I think what that amounts to is not trying. Now that's me. Just to give you a brief introduction, my daughter took that picture. She's only 3, so she's doing really well. I work at Pivotal, and I used to be an analyst. I write a column at the Register. I do a podcast. I actually have some stickers for software-defined talk if you want them. But that's my background to establish credibility. Now, to unestablish credibility, it turns out that if you make a 5-slide deck for this, that does not equal 20 slides. So if you look through this, you'll see there's some padding going on to fill out what I thought was going to be a brief 5-point slide. So first of all, this is a headstone that I think a lot about. Now, never mind what you might think of Bukowski and him being kind of a unmentionable word. But he has this epithet here, which I think is really great. It's like, as my title is, don't try. Like, what does that actually mean? Now, a lot of people would assume this is sort of a nihilistic position, right? Like you should just give up and be drunk all the time, which does indeed look exhausting. But I think there's something more to that about, the kind of idea of what it means when you don't have to try to do something and the kind of effortlessness that you have. Now, before we get into it, I think there are some things worth trying out on. Probably rocket science is good, so you don't blow things up. Food is good, your family, your job, kind of like some sort of how you analyze things that you know and don't know. And, happiness is pretty good. But let's think about not trying as effortlessness. So whenever you're first learning how to drive, you spend a lot of time thinking about it, and it feels very weird and error-prone. But eventually you get to this point where driving feels effortless, and you realize you're not really thinking about what's going on. And in fact, it kind of works out. Like if you see the amount of car trips that we have, and then fatalities and accidents, all of these people kind of effortlessly driving around, maybe even texting, it actually works out okay for them. Like they're not trying at it. It's just built into the way that they're doing things. Now, I was over in New Zealand recently, and if they switch the sides of the roads, I don't know why they do that. Like you do have to try. And you notice that you're always trying to put your windshield wipers on when you want to turn, instead of actually using your turn signals. So it kind of shows the fact that you're always thinking effortlessly about thinking when you're driving. Now, here's some sort of anti-patterns. One of them is analysis paralysis, right? Like thinking about something way too much into the moment of sort of like psychosis. I actually saw a diagram of a safe thinking that looked a lot like this, but I didn't have time to put that in there. So what results with a lot of upfront thinking and analysis paralysis, you've got the metaphoric 3-ring binder, lots of documentation. You're never actually testing out or doing something. You're just thinking about how it might work in theory. And you're forever building up this amount of unknownness, this kind of red line of risk. Until you actually deploy something, as you kind of see more frequently at the bottom, you're really trying too hard to think about things instead of just launching it. And usually what you find is if you actually just go out and try things, you sort of break stuff as you go along and figure out how to recover from it, you operate a lot faster. Now, I don't know math at all, so maybe Andrew can lecture me after this, but there's also this idea of reversion to mean, which is like, you're probably like woebegonish in being average, and you might excel sometimes and do well, and lower sometimes and do worse. And I was thinking about this when I was reading the SRE book, where there's a bunch of mumbo-jumbo here, but they're basically like, you should just not try very hard to deliver excellence in service. What you should do is always be kind of average, because people will get really upset when you fail. And I don't really know what this diagram is, but my buddy John Willis used it, and it looks really awesome. But that amounts to basically, you want to be sandbagging, right? Like, you want to pad out your estimates, kind of say things are going to take a long time, they're really hard, because you don't really want to set expectations that you do really well all the time. And I think that has consequences, right? Like as my friend John pointed out, like if a meteor takes out the data center, you don't fire the sysadmin. It wasn't their fault, right? There's just like, it was out of the bounds of ordinariness, so they don't really need to plan around that. Now, another thing that I often advocate with people is like, you should probably not speak up in meetings and suggest good ideas. So here, we see someone suggesting a new way of doing something, and the manager there is thinking about, good, this is some new homework I can assign to them. This is work they can do. So it's good to have a list in your mind of things that are probably good not to talk about in a meeting, so that you don't have to try, unless you want to be assigned this extra homework. I mean, my favorite is always like, how about we make a 6-page memo, right? Like, or, Let's bring some pizzas in or whatever. This is how Amazon does it. Now, finally, I think when it does come to trying, I wanted a better picture than this, but there's this old idea of rope-a-dope, right? Where you have some sort of opponent, you have them try a lot, and then they get really tired, and finally you do the minimal amount of trying to just basically win the situation that you had. So here's a cute picture of animals. And thanks for coming here. I have a talk tomorrow during the DevOps track. You should come out to the whole track. There's a bunch of good things there. And, feel free to engage with my brand. Thanks for having me here.